Hey guys, Joey here, and in today's video, I'm going to walk you through how I approach mastering a song. And once you become the master of mastering, your clients will be excited by your first mix. Most artists aren't really used to hearing their mixes unmastered, so every engineer has to be familiar with their master chain if they want to impress their clients. I have a fairly simple approach to this, so let's get right into it. If you ask 10 engineers what mastering means, they might have 10 different answers. This leads to a lot of confusion about the topic. To me, mastering is simply the process of optimizing a track to be consistent across different playback environments, have the right overall frequency response, and be loud enough to compete with other modern mixes in the genre. The first thing you've got to figure out is your listening environment. This is important for mixing, but it's even more important for mastering, since you're the final word on the mix's quality. This means have a balanced full spectrum listening environment. This is a pretty deep topic, so I'm just going to scratch the surface here, but make sure you can hear the extreme highs and lows whenever you go to master. This comes down to the layout of the room, the speakers used, and the room treatment. Small square rooms are pretty much the worst rooms you could have for detailed listening. The parallel walls create phase issues that make it harder to hear certain frequencies. You can combat this with acoustic treatment. The kind of treatment that you're going to need is a really involved process that I can't cover here, but if you want to go down that route, I've left a link in the description that explains it all. If you don't have a great room for this, consider booking a studio that does. And once you've picked a suitable room and gotten your acoustic treatment in order, you can lock in the sound even more with something like SonarWorks. This EQ correction software takes a reading of your room and then finds any weird inconsistencies in the frequency spectrum and applies corrective EQ so that you can get a really flat response. A good tip with SonarWorks is to keep treating your room until there aren't any crazy dips or bumps. This software works best in small doses. Your master is only as good as your mix. So here's a few tips to get a mix ready for mastering. Make sure there's no clipping or limiting on the master bus. Clean mastering requires few dB of headroom, so I like to keep my mixes peaking at around -6 to -3 dB, which gives me enough room to work. Once I'm ready to master, I'll make a new session. Having a separate mastering session is cool because it forces you to commit to the mix. You can always go back and rebounce it if there's an issue, but when it's time to master, I like to focus on the overall balance rather than the individual instruments. The master session should be the same bit depth and sample rate as the unmastered mix. Anything less is going to be sacrificing the quality, and anything over is going to create empty hard drive space. You can't add information that isn't already there. Referencing other mixes you or the artist likes is a really great way to keep the end goal in mind. It serves as kind of a compass for the frequency balance and overall loudness. The thing to keep in mind when referencing is that they work as a guide, not something that you should completely copy. Your reference tracks are going to be different songs with different tunings, and it's going to be different than what you're working with, so it'll never sound exactly the same. I like to actually bring the references into my sessions so that I can A/B them against my master. And a good tip with references is to keep them at the same volume as your song. Since the mix isn't limited yet, it will likely be quieter than the reference tracks. This makes it easier to actually hear the differences between the master and the reference. As you add compression and limiting, bring those reference tracks up to the same loudness so that you can keep checking. I like to start my masters with a little bit of bus compression. My goal here is to just catch the peaks, not drastically altering the whole song. If there are any problem areas, I take this a step further with a multi-band compressor. A common issue with amateur mixes is that the low frequencies will be loose and unbalanced. Too much bass movement or subvolume will throw off the limiter later in the chain, so getting it tight here is a great move. With the dynamics under control, the next thing I look at is the overall frequency spectrum. How bright or dark is the song? How loud is the mid-range? How much emphasis is the bass getting? To get closer to the reference, I like to use a linear phase EQ and make broad, low Q moves. I like linear phase because it doesn't introduce complicated phase changes in the mix. And when the whole song is being manipulated, these phase variations can be way more noticeable. The only time I'll use parametric EQ on a master bus is if there are specific frequencies that I need to deal with. For example, a lot of mixes have harshness from 3 to 5K that I'll notch with a regular parametric EQ. The last step in my mastering chain is a combination of widening, limiting, and dithering. If a mix feels too mono, I'll use a stereo imager to push the side elements out a little bit. It's a really easy way to ruin a master at this stage, so make sure you're using subtle adjustments and comparing them to the reference. Next is limiting. This pushes the entire song to a higher consistent loudness. The settings here are really dependent on the mix volume, the style, and where the song will be played. How loud you can play a mix is determined by compression, EQ, and balance choices within the mix. You can tell the mix has been pushed as far as it can go when you hear slight distortion coming from the limiter. Higher energy rock or metal songs with less dynamics can be pushed a little louder in the limiting process than something like a singer-songwriter or orchestral music. Crushing these softer genres with aggressive limiting can bring up noise and destroy some of the natural dynamics, so keep that in mind. CD, vinyl, and streaming have all different loudness standards. It's important to ask the artist where and how they plan to distribute the music. It's pretty common to even make separate loudness masters for each platform. The last thing on my master chain will be a dither. This only matters when you're going down in bit rate. Most sessions will be recorded, mixed, and mastered in either 24 or 32-bit depth, but the standard for most end products is going to be 16-bit depth. This means that 8 to 16 bits will have to be cut off. That causes a super subtle noise. It's barely even audible, but if you're going for maximum quality, it should be dealt with. Dithering is a really complicated process, but it basically repurposes the noise to a higher inaudible frequency. Now that the audio is widened, limited, and dithered, it's ready to go. Just export to the desired sample rate. 44.1 kHz for CD and streaming, 48 kHz for DVD and other video applications. Mastering is usually a very subtle process. I try not to go too hard with any one plugin since I'm altering the entire mix. A few small moves can make a big difference, but it can also ruin a mix if you're not careful. Just make sure to keep referencing while you go and make sure that you haven't overcooked anything. And that's it. Do you master your own mixes? What tools do you use in your master bus? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to check the links in the description below and tap that bell to get notified whenever we upload new videos. Until next time, happy mastering.